Forget the black and white photos for a second. Forget the grainy newsreels. I want you to picture this. It's June 6th, 1944. The air tastes like salt and cordite, and the sound is a demonic symphony of machine gun fire and screaming artillery. You're a young British soldier, barely out of your teens, and the cold, unforgiving water of the English Channel is soaking through your boots as you scramble onto the blood-stained sands of Normandy. The lump of wood and steel in your hands, the tool you're trusting with your life, looks like it belongs to your grandfather. It's a design that was already middle-aged. Meanwhile, tucked behind a concrete bunker, a German soldier is drawing a bead on you. His weapon is the Carabiner 98K. It's sleek, it's powerful, and it's a masterpiece of engineering, the very pinnacle of what a bolt-action rifle could be. On paper, this is a suicide mission. You're bringing a museum piece to a gunfight with a modern marvel. But here's the million-dollar question, the paradox that baffles historians and firearm experts to this day. Why on God's green earth would a British soldier, whose life depends on his weapon, capture one of these state-of-the-art German rifles, and then toss it in a ditch to keep his old, outdated Lee-Enfield? This wasn't patriotism clouding their judgment. It wasn't stubborn pride or a refusal to adapt. It was the complete opposite. It was a cold, hard, and brutal form of battlefield pragmatism, a wisdom learned through sheer survival. To understand this battlefield decision, we have to understand that these weren't just two rifles. They were two completely different philosophies of war, forged in steel. On one side, you have the German Mauser K98K. Think of it as a thoroughbred athlete, a finely tuned instrument. It was born from a culture of engineering perfectionism, built by craftsmen who measured success in microns. It was a marksman's rifle, designed to be precise, deadly, and accurate at ranges that most soldiers would never even see an enemy at. It was, by all technical measures, the superior machine, and on the other side, you have the British short magazine Lee-Enfield, the SMLE. If the Mauser was a thoroughbred, the Enfield was the stubborn, mud-caked workhorse. It's the old Ford pickup truck of the rifle world. It's not pretty. It doesn't win beauty contests. But it starts every single time. Whether it's frozen solid, drowning in mud, or choked with sand. It's not the tool you show off to your friends. It's the friend that will pull you out of a ditch in the middle of a thunderstorm. The story of this legendary workhorse begins way back in the 1880s. The British Empire, at the height of its power, realized its iconic redcoats were being outgunned. The age of single-shot rifles was over. The future was in repeating firearms using newfangled smokeless powder. The search was on for a weapon that could keep Britain's enemies at bay. The answer came from a Scottish-Canadian inventor named James Paris Lee. He had designed a brilliantly simple and robust detachable box magazine system. It was a game-changer. At the same time, the engineers at the Royal Small Arms Factory at Enfield had perfected a new type of rifling. It was a marriage of two brilliant ideas: Lee's magazine and Enfield's barrel. The result was the magazine Lee-Enfield. Its first real test came in the harsh terrain of the Second Boer War in South Africa. The early versions showed promise but also had flaws. The British, however, were masters of learning from their mistakes. They tweaked, they refined, they listened to the soldiers who actually used the weapon. And by 1907, after several iterations, the rifle that would define the British Tommy for half a century was born. The short magazine Lee-Enfield Mach III. The iconic SMLE. What made this rifle so special wasn't one single revolutionary feature. It was a collection of practical, battle-tested design choices that prioritized what actually mattered when your life was on the line. And this is where the two philosophies of war truly diverge. The standard military thinking across Europe, especially in Germany, was an obsession with long-range accuracy. Generals and strategists were convinced that the next war would be won by disciplined riflemen hitting targets at 800, 1,000, even 1,500 yards. The German military prided themselves on marksmanship, and their Mauser rifles were the embodiment of this philosophy. with long barrels and incredibly tight manufacturing tolerances to squeeze every last drop of precision out of the weapon. The British took a different, almost heretical path. Their combat studies from conflicts around the globe told them a different story. Most firefights weren't elegant long-distance duels. They were nasty, close-up brawls that happened well within 300 yards. So, they made a radical decision with the SMLE. They shortened the barrel to just 25.2 inches. This made the rifle lighter and handier in the claustrophobic confines of a trench or the back of a vehicle. They willingly accepted a slight decrease in long-range accuracy because they knew, with prophetic insight, that speed and ease of use at close quarters would save more lives. To the theorists in Berlin, this was madness. But to the men who would soon be fighting and dying in the trenches of World War I, it was a godsend. Even the rifle's core design raised eyebrows among the so-called experts. The SMLE used a rear-locking bolt. Most military rifles of the era, including the gold standard Mauser, used a front-locking system. In a front-locking design, the lugs that contain the immense pressure of a firing cartridge are right at the front of the bolt, near the chamber. It's mechanically stronger and theoretically more accurate. The Lee-Enfield's lugs were at the rear of the bolt. Critics screamed that this was a weaker, less precise design. They argued it could never match the pinpoint accuracy of a Mauser. And you know what? On a pristine shooting range, on a calm Sunday afternoon, they were absolutely right. But battlefields aren't shooting ranges, and that flawed rear-locking bolt design held a secret advantage, a hidden genius that mattered more than shaving a few inches off a paper target at 600 yards. It was an advantage that would turn ordinary men into human machine guns and leave the German high command utterly bewildered. So, how did a rifle with a supposedly weaker design not only compete with but often outperform the pinnacle of German engineering? The answer wasn't found in a quiet laboratory. It was forged in the harshest training regimen in the world, a standard so demanding that it sounds like a myth. The Mad Minute. The British Army had a deceptively simple requirement for every single infantryman. He was expected to fire 15 aimed rounds at a 12-inch target 300 yards away, all within 60 seconds. Let that sink in. That's one accurate shot every 4 seconds, and that includes a full reload. The truly skilled, the men who lived and breathed their rifles, could push that to an astonishing 30 rounds a minute. This wasn't some peacetime trick shooting for show. This was a fundamental tactical doctrine. It was the British solution to the age-old problem of firepower. It was their way of turning a squad of riflemen into a human machine gun, and the Lee-Enfield was the perfect instrument for this symphony of destruction. Its design, criticized by purists, was a masterclass in ergonomics and speed. It all started with the bolt handle. On most military rifles, like the Mauser, the bolt handle has to be rotated a full 90 degrees to unlock it. It's a strong, secure action, but it's a significant motion. The SMLE's bolt handle only required a 60-degree rotation. It sounds like a small difference, but in the heat of battle, it's everything. It was a short, sharp flick of the wrist, not a full rotation. Your hand barely had to change its grip on the rifle. The movements were smaller, faster, and more natural. But the real secret, the design choice that made rapid fire feel intuitive, was its cock-on closing mechanism. Here's what that means in plain English. With a Mauser, the mainspring is compressed when you lift the bolt handle and pull it back. All the effort is on the opening and extraction stroke. You're fighting the spring's tension while trying to pull the spent cartridge out. The Lee-Enfield did the opposite. When you lifted the bolt and pulled it back, it was almost effortless. The spent casing ejected smoothly, with no resistance. All the work of compressing the mainspring happened on the forward stroke, when you were pushing the new round into the chamber. This felt incredibly natural. You're using the powerful muscles of your arm and shoulder to push forward, an aggressive motion that lines up perfectly with the act of chambering a fresh round and getting back on target. It was a fluid, cyclical motion, flick, pull, push, click, that could be performed at incredible speed once it was drilled into your muscle memory. And the British Army was obsessed with drilling it into their soldiers. British musketry training was arguably the most intensive in the world. New recruits spent weeks, sometimes months, at rifle ranges before they were taught any other aspect of combat. They learned to fire from every conceivable position: standing, kneeling, sitting, prone. They practiced rapid magazine changes in the dark, with numb fingers, until they could swap a fresh 10-round magazine in under 3 seconds. They were taught to estimate range with the naked eye and adjust their sights in a heartbeat. The SMLE's ladder sight, while looking archaic, was brilliantly simple. Flip a lever, slide the sight, lock it down. No fine-tuning, no overthinking, just brutal, combat, practical speed. The legendary sergeant instructor Snoxall of the School of Musketry in Hythe reportedly achieved 38 aimed hits on a target in 1 minute during a demonstration in 1914. Now, it's true he had an assistant feeding him loaded rifles, but the point wasn't to set a world record. The point was to demonstrate what was physically possible. It was to ingrain a level of skill and confidence so deep that rapid, accurate fire became an automatic, subconscious reaction to stress, not a deliberate thought process. And on August 23, 1914, this system of man and machine faced its ultimate test. At the Belgian town of Mons, a small British expeditionary force of roughly 70,000 men stood in the path of a German steamroller, 160,000 troops of the German First Army. The Germans were confident, almost arrogant. They expected to brush aside what they considered a small, outdated colonial army. Instead, they ran headfirst into a wall of fire. As the German infantry advanced in dense formations, the British riflemen unleashed the Mad Minute. The sound was unlike anything the Germans had ever heard. It wasn't the sporadic crack of individual rifles. It was a continuous, deafening roar, a hailstorm of 303 caliber rounds that tore through their ranks. German officers, veterans of a dozen campaigns, were stunned. They were convinced they were facing dozens, perhaps hundreds of machine guns. Their intelligence reports had been wrong. The British must have secretly equipped their entire army with the new weapon, but they weren't facing machine guns. At the Battle of Mons, the British had just 2 to 4 machine guns per battalion. The rest of that terrifying wall of sound was just ordinary men, doing exactly what they had been trained to do with their supposedly outdated rifles. The German attacks faltered and broke. Entire companies were stopped in their tracks, pinned down by a volume of fire they simply couldn't comprehend. After-action reports from the German side are filled with bewildered references to nests of machine guns and sustained automatic fire. One German lieutenant, captured later that week, told his interrogators that his unit had been pinned down by what he estimated to be at least 20 machine guns. He had personally counted the rate of fire and insisted it was impossible for bolt-action rifles to generate that kind of firepower. He simply could not believe it until his captors showed him. The Battle of Mons was a tactical retreat for the British, but it was a profound strategic and psychological victory. They had held off a force more than twice their size, inflicting devastating casualties, all because of a rifle and a doctrine that prioritized speed over theoretical precision. The SMLE wasn't just a rifle, it was a system. A partnership between a cleverly designed machine and the world's most rigorously trained soldiers. But firing fast on a clear day is one thing. What happens when the battlefield turns into a living hell of mud, ice, and sand? That is where the Lee-Enfield would reveal its second, and perhaps most important, secret advantage. A stubborn refusal to die. Trench warfare was a gun designer's nightmare. It was a place where elegant theories and precision engineering went to die. Forget clean testing facilities and controlled environments. The reality of the Western Front was a primordial soup of rain, snow, and the uniquely corrosive mud of Flanders, a thick, clay-heavy ooze that had an almost supernatural ability to work its way into every screw, spring, and crevice of a machine. Soldiers didn't have the luxury of following the maintenance manuals. There was no heated armory, no clean workbench, no abundant supply of proper cleaning oils. Your rifle was your constant companion in that filth. You wiped it down with an oily rag if you were lucky, but mostly you just hoped for the best. and in these apocalyptic conditions, one rifle thrived while the other struggled. The secret wasn't in superior metallurgy or advanced design. The secret was that the Lee-Enfield was, by design, a little bit loose. British manufacturing tolerances were deliberately less precise than German standards. To a German engineer, raised on a philosophy of perfection, this would look like sloppy, inferior craftsmanship. But to a British Tommy lying in a freezing, waterlogged trench, that sloppiness was the difference between a working rifle and a very expensive club. Here's the best way for an American to understand it. The Mauser K98K was like a precision-engineered German sports car, a Porsche or a Mercedes. On a clean, dry racetrack, its performance is breathtaking. But take that same car and try to drive it through a muddy field in rural Texas after a thunderstorm. It will clog up, spin out, and die. The Lee-Enfield was the old, beat-up Ford F-150 that's been in the family for 30 years. It's got dents and scratches. The engine makes a funny noise, and it might leak a little oil. But you know, with absolute certainty, that if you need to haul something through that same muddy field, it will claw its way through and get the job done. It will always, always get you home. When that Flanders mud or ice got into the action of a Mauser, its tight, precise tolerances left no room for error. The debris would bind the moving parts, jamming the action solid. You'd see German soldiers frantically, desperately trying to pry their bolts open while under fire. But when that same grime got into a Lee-Enfield, the generous clearances, that extra little bit of wiggle room between the parts, meant the bolt could still move. It might feel gritty, it might sound like it was grinding gravel, but it would still cycle. It would still fire. This is where the story moves beyond engineering and into the realm of human psychology. Ask any combat veteran, and they'll tell you the single most terrifying sound on a battlefield. It isn't the scream of an incoming shell or the roar of a machine gun. It's the dead, metallic click when you expected a bang. It's the sound of your weapon failing you at the one moment you need it most. It's a sound that stops your heart. A German soldier, proud of his superior rifle, had to hope it would work in the filth. A British soldier trusted his wood. The Lee-Enfield wasn't just a tool, it was a promise. A promise that when a bayonet charge came pouring over the top of the trench, it would not let you down. This raises a fascinating question, a debate that rages in military procurement to this day. Is it more ethical to give a soldier a scalpel that is perfect in ideal conditions, but might break under pressure, or to give him a hammer that will always, reliably fall? This incredible durability wasn't just a fluke of the trenches. The Lee-Enfield proved its mettle in every hellish environment the war had to offer. Take it to the deserts of North Africa. The sand there, whipped by the wind, is finer than dust and as abrasive as sandpaper. It gets into everything. The brutal temperature swings, from freezing nights to 120-degree days, caused metal parts to expand and contract. This was a nightmare for a rifle with tight tolerances like the Mauser. German field manuals were filled with special, complex procedures for desert maintenance. British manuals essentially said, "Shake the sand out and keep shooting." Australian and New Zealand troops, the legendary Desert Rats, held the besieged port of Tobruk for 241 days, enduring relentless attacks and blinding sandstorms. Their letters and diaries are a testament to the Enfield. When the sand cleared, their rifles worked. The Italian Carcano rifles used by the opposing forces would often be seized completely solid. Even the vaunted Mauser needed a thorough, time-consuming cleaning before it could be trusted. The sand that would jam a Mauser's finely tuned action simply fell through the Lee-Enfield's more forgiving gaps. Now, let's trade the searing heat for the suffocating humidity of the jungle. In Burma, British and Commonwealth soldiers fought the Japanese in some of the worst conditions imaginable. Torrential monsoon rains, mud that could swallow a man whole, and a humidity that never slept, causing metal to rust literally overnight and wooden stocks to swell and warp. The Japanese Arisaka rifle, a well-made weapon, struggled mightily. Moisture would get trapped in its action, causing feeding problems. But the Lee-Enfield, with its simple design and drainage features in the magazine well, just kept going. Sergeant Charles Carfrey of the Border Regiment wrote about his rifle after 3 solid weeks of slogging through the jungle in early 1944. He described the metal as being spotted with rust. The walnut stock turned almost black from moisture. The barrel fouled from hundreds of rounds fired without a proper cleaning. Yet, when his unit ambushed a Japanese patrol, his rifle functioned flawlessly. He noted seeing captured Japanese rifles that looked to be in far better cosmetic shape but wouldn't cycle because the humidity had swollen them shut. Even in the frozen hell of the Arctic Circle, during the ill-fated Norway campaign of 1940, the Lee-Enfield proved its worth. At temperatures that dropped far below zero, lubricants would turn to thick gel, and any moisture would freeze metal parts together instantly. The German solution was specialized cold-weather oils and meticulous care. The British solution was brilliantly simple. Remove all the oil from the action and run it dry. The rifle's loose design allowed it to function perfectly without lubrication in the extreme cold. It was a rifle born for the worst places on Earth. It was a survivor. Magazine capacity sounds like a boring technical detail, something for the gun nerds to argue about on an internet forum. But on a battlefield, it's not a statistic. It's a clock. It's the countdown timer on your life. And the simple, brutal mathematics of the Lee-Enfield versus the Mauser fundamentally changed the way soldiers fought and died. The Lee-Enfield held 10 rounds in its detachable box magazine. The Mauser K98K held 5 rounds in an internal magazine, 2-to-1. It's a simple ratio, but its implications were profound. Imagine you're in a firefight. A German soldier opens fire. He can shoot 5 times before his world must stop. To reload, he has to open the bolt, take a 5-round stripper clip from his pouch, a small, fiddly piece of metal, guide it into the slot on his receiver, and then, using his thumb, press all 5 rounds down into the magazine. Then he has to pull the now empty clip out and chamber the first round. A well-trained soldier could do it in 6 to 8 seconds. But that's a lifetime when people are trying to kill you. What if your hands are shaking? What if it's dark? What if you drop the clip in the mud? Now, imagine you're the British Tommy. You fire your 10th shot. Your rifle is empty. But you're not fumbling with clips. You've got pre-loaded magazines in your web gear. In one fluid motion that has been drilled into you 1,000 times, your trigger finger hits the magazine release. The empty mag drops free. You grab a fresh one, slam it home until it clicks, and you're back in the fight. Time elapsed? 3 seconds. Maybe 4 if you're slow. In the 5 or 6 seconds of vulnerability the German soldier experienced, the British soldier was already putting more rounds down range. This wasn't just an individual advantage. It scaled up with terrifying efficiency. A standard British infantry section was 10 men. In a firefight, that section could deliver 100 rounds before a single soldier needed to reload. A comparable German squad of 10 men could deliver 50. The British could sustain a wall of lead for twice as long. This created what military tacticians call fire superiority. It's the ability to keep the enemy's head down, to pin them in place, to dictate the terms of the engagement. While German soldiers were desperately trying to reload their rifles, British soldiers were still shooting. They were suppressing, maneuvering, flanking. The firefight became a deadly game of rhythm and interruption. The Germans fought in bursts of 5, followed by a long, dangerous pause. The British fought in a more continuous, rolling thunder of 10. The system itself was just smarter for the reality of combat. A British soldier typically carried his ammunition in 2 pouches, each holding 5 loaded 10-round magazines. That's 100 rounds, ready for instant use. A German soldier carried his ammo in pouches, designed for stripper clips. It was efficient for his rifle's design, but it meant every single reload was a manual, multi-step process. The Lee-Enfield even had another clever trick up its sleeve: the magazine cutoff. It was a small plate that, when engaged, would prevent the bolt from picking up a round from the magazine. This effectively turned the SMLE into a single-shot rifle. A soldier could load and fire single rounds, conserving his main supply, while keeping a full 10-round magazine in reserve. If the situation suddenly went south and he needed rapid fire, he could disengage the cutoff with a flick of his thumb and instantly have 10 rounds at his disposal. The Mauser had no such feature. You couldn't seamlessly switch between conserving ammunition and unleashing a storm, but the most powerful evidence doesn't come from the spec sheets. It comes from the men who used these rifles. Their stories, passed down in letters, diaries, and interviews, are the ultimate verdict. Private Harold Bolton of the Royal Warwickshire Regiment wrote home in October 1914. His section had overrun a German position and found several abandoned Mauser rifles in perfect condition. The men, professional soldiers, examined them with curiosity. This was the wonder weapon German propaganda had been boasting about. Bolton's sergeant, a grizzled veteran, worked the Mauser's smooth action, aimed it, and handed it back with a dry comment that perfectly captures the British soldier's mindset. "Fine weapon for a Sunday shoot. I'll keep me Lee-Enfield for killing Germans, thanks." Every single man in that section kept his SMLE. This wasn't an isolated incident. The pattern repeated itself across every theatre of the war. Corporal Jack Thomas, fighting with the 8th Army in the brutal deserts of North Africa, described in his diary how his platoon captured a German supply dump in 1943. They helped themselves to food, ammunition, and even a few of the coveted MP-40 submachine guns. But the stacks of captured K-98K rifles were left behind in the sand. Thomas wrote, "The lads won't trade their rifles. Jerry's looks smart, but ours shoots faster, and that's what counts when they're running at you." Perhaps the most telling perspective comes from the enemy themselves. Lieutenant William Douglas Home was serving in Normandy in July 1944. After a fierce engagement, his unit took several German prisoners. During interrogation, he noted their grudging respect for the sheer volume of British rifle fire. One German sergeant was adamant that his squad had been pinned down by automatic weapons. He was a professional. He knew the sound of a machine gun. Douglas Home, intrigued, explained that it was just bolt-action rifles. The sergeant refused to believe him. He had counted the incoming rounds and insisted no bolt-action rifle could sustain that rate of fire. So, Douglas Home brought out a standard SMLE and a few clips of ammo. He demonstrated the rapid-fire technique of the Mad Minute. The German sergeant watched in silence. Douglas Home wrote that the look on the man's face was a mixture of respect and profound annoyance at having been so thoroughly beaten by what he had always been told was obsolete junk. In the end, the choice was simple. The Mauser was a marksman's rifle. But war isn't a marksmanship competition. It's a chaotic, terrifying fight for survival. And in that fight, having twice the ammunition, a faster reload, and a design that prioritized speed over everything else gave the British soldier a crucial edge. It was an edge measured not in inches on a target, but in seconds of life. The service life of most military weapons tells a predictable story. They are born from necessity, serve through a war or two, and are then quietly retired to museums and history books when something newer and better comes along. The American Springfield 1903, the Soviet Mosin Nagant, the Japanese Arisaka. By the 1950 seconds, their time on the front lines was over. Even the technically brilliant Mauser 98K, the SMLE's great rival, was largely phased out within years of Germany's defeat. But the Lee-Enfield refused to follow the script. Its story didn't end in 1945, far from it. The rifle that stormed the trenches of WWII and the beaches of World War II went on to fight in Korea. It served with British and Commonwealth troops through the brutal jungle warfare of the Malayan Emergency. It was carried by soldiers in Kenya, Suez, and even as late as the Falklands War in 1982. Incredibly, the Canadian Rangers, an elite force patrolling the harsh Canadian Arctic, were still being issued a variant of the Lee-Enfield until 2018. That's a service life of over 120 years. No other bolt-action military rifle in history even comes close. This astonishing longevity wasn't a result of nostalgia or some kind of bureaucratic laziness. It was a testament to a simple, undeniable fact. The rifle just plain worked. It was a recognition that its designers had gotten the fundamentals of a soldier's weapon so profoundly right that it transcended generations of technological change. The story of the Lee-Enfield offers us timeless lessons that go far beyond the comparison of two rifles. The first lesson is that effectiveness in the field will always trump excellence on paper. The German military philosophy chased the ideal of a perfect shot from a perfect rifle. The British philosophy accepted the messy reality of combat and built a tool for that reality. They understood that sustained, rapid fire from a reliable weapon was far more valuable than the theoretical precision that most soldiers could never hope to exploit under the terror and chaos of battle. This lesson has been painfully relearned time and time again. The early M16 rifle in Vietnam, with its tight tolerances, was a beautiful piece of engineering that jammed catastrophically in the jungle humidity. The exact same problem that plagued the Mauser in the mud of Flanders. The solution? Loosening those tolerances, a principle the Lee-Enfield had embodied since 1907. The legendary reliability of the AK-47, perhaps the most successful rifle design in history, comes from its generous clearances that allow it to function when filled with sand and dirt, a direct echo of what made the SMLE work in the trenches 70 years earlier. The second lesson is about complexity versus simplicity. The Mauser was a more sophisticated machine. Controlled feed extraction, dual front-locking lugs, superior metallurgy, but every piece of sophistication adds a layer of complexity, and every layer of complexity is another potential point of failure. The Lee-Enfield succeeded through its elegant simplicity. Its rear-locking bolt, its loose construction, and its straightforward manual of arms made it easier to use, easier to maintain, and much, much harder to break. This is critical, because wars aren't just fought by elite career soldiers. They're fought by terrified teenagers, by conscripted farmers and factory workers. A weapon that performs flawlessly only in the hands of an expert is a liability. A weapon that performs adequately in anyone's hands is a war winner. Finally, there's the stark economic lesson. Over its lifetime, Britain and its Commonwealth partners produced roughly 17 million Lee-Enfield rifles. The manufacturing process was simpler and faster than what the Mauser required. This meant that when war came, factories could be spun up quickly, workers could be trained faster, and costs could be kept down. This became a decisive strategic advantage. Germany produced excellent rifles, but they could never produce enough of them. Britain produced a good enough rifle in numbers so vast they could not only arm their own forces, but also supply resistance movements and allied nations across the globe. History has repeatedly proven that an adequate weapon in sufficient quantity is better than a superior weapon in limited numbers. In the end, the Lee-Enfield was never the most accurate rifle. It wasn't the most powerful, or the most advanced, or the most beautiful. But for the common soldier, the infantryman, the poor bloody infantry on the ground, it was something more important. It was the best. It was the rifle that kept working when everything else had failed. It was the rifle they trusted with their lives. It was the rifle that got them home. The British Tommy's preference for his outdated rifle wasn't stubbornness. It was the hard-won wisdom of a survivor. And that brings us to the ultimate question, the choice at the heart of this story. It's a debate between two powerful ideas, the relentless pursuit of perfection versus the wisdom of pragmatism. So, we want to hear from you. In a life-or-death situation, what would you choose? The finely tuned precision instrument that demands respect, or the rugged, utterly dependable companion that asks for nothing but will never let you down? Let us know your choice and your reasons why in the comments below. And if you have a story about another piece of underdog military gear that punched way above its weight, we'd love to hear it. Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of World War II's most fascinating paradoxes.